hopefully are stories. And I bet if parents think of their own stories, some of them can be hopeful. Whereas when you look back, there were times when you really didn't get along with a sibling that now you get along with better. I do think there are also cases, though, realistically, where siblings just are either so different or your sibling has some kind of maybe a mental health issue or something that really does make them very difficult to have any relationship with. And that's something that is just life.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. I'm so excited for the arrival soon of my new book, Happy Campers, 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults. I really appreciate this endorsement from Signa Whitson, who is an author, an international educator on bullying prevention, and a school psychologist. Signa says, although I just got my copy of Happy Campers by Audrey Monkey, you would think I had owned it for years already, given the multitude of dog-eared pages, the massive amount of notes in the margins, and the number of parents I've already lent the book to, urging them to read specific sections. Happy Campers is the brand new but already well-worn book I wish I had 20 years ago when I first started my career working with children and families. It is full of practical, realistic, easy to implement, no-cost, research-based, transformational strategies that will help parents and caregivers bring the magic of summer camp into daily home interactions. Happy Campers shines a light on 9 overall positive practices used in quality summer camps and offers readers dozens and dozens of ways to use these strategies to help kids and families thrive year-round. Starting with ideas for building nurturing connections between family members, and then exploring critical topics such as the importance of optimism in interactions, how to nurture grit and determination, helping kids experience independence and grow their individual identities, making kindness cool, building healthy friendship skills, and cultivating the kind of self-confidence that makes kids unstoppable. Monkey's book is as realistic and readable as it is invaluable. As a school counselor, therapist, and parent, Happy Campers is everything I could hope for in a book and more. I highly recommend it for anyone living or working with young people. For ordering information, visit happycampersbook.com. You'll find links to different retailers who will be carrying Happy Campers, and you can pre-order your copy now. For this week's episode of the podcast, which is episode 82, I'm thrilled to have Sara Kuljis back on for the start of a series that we're doing about sibling conflict and sibling rivalry. One of my favorite things is to receive emails or calls from parents interested in asking a question or seeing if I have any resources or advice on a topic. And this topic, how as a parent to manage the conflict that naturally occurs between siblings, is one that's come up twice in the last month. I hope you get some insights and encouragement as you listen to this week's episode about sibling conflict.
Well, I have my favorite, I'm now going to call her my co-host, Sara Kuljis, back on. And we are talking about a topic that seems like it comes up a lot for parents, which is sibling rivalry.
And both Audrey and I, having siblings, experienced that probably as kids and now with our own children and our own family, as well as seeing it play out perhaps sometimes at summer camp when siblings come to camp. We've been in it.
Yes. So we're really excited to tackle this topic, which I told Sara, it came up. I actually got 2 different listener questions about sibling rivalry and just kind of resolving conflicts in general. So I'm going to read first one of them, and then we're going to talk about just some of our ideas and thoughts on the topic of how, as parents, we could just help address this kind of constant issue that seems to come up in just about every family, which is conflict between siblings. So here was one of the questions. I'm a mom of 2 kids, an almost 13-year-old girl and a just turned 8-year-old boy. My husband and I have both taught in public and private schools, and we've been youth leaders in churches. Our current challenge is to help our kids with conflict resolution, since it seems they tend to be in conflict fairly often at school and at home. Can't we just all get along? The difference in age, personalities, and sexes has made it extra difficult. So just some initial thoughts on that question before we get into some of the details. Sarah, what are your thoughts? You mentioned some before we recorded, and I think it's really valid.
Well, sure. I think, the chemistry and the personality and interests of our children sometimes don't line up. There are some families whose kids do just get along. They're each other's best friends. And then there are families whose children, because they're so different, or maybe the age spread or the interest level and various activities is so unique from each other, that they really struggle to be compatible. And as parents, there's only so much we can do about that.
Right.
So it is good, though, as a parent to determine what is my level of influence, how do I influence, and what things do I just need to be patient for. Certainly, many children squabbled as youngsters, but grew to be adults who really deeply cared for each other. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a long road.
Yes, it is. And I think like everything else, we have to kind of look at the long-term picture. We're hopeful that the things we do as parents will at least promote long-term positive relationships, but even that is not guaranteed depending on the relationships. But I also thought something that you commented on before is that these people are obviously experts in children, and it can be very frustrating when you work with a lot of kids and you know a lot about kids to see your own kids not getting along very well. And I think one thing is just to reassure that probably in this family, they're doing everything probably right in terms of how they're responding to their kids, but there's just some things that you just can't fix like in the moment because of the personalities or age differences or just being in different phases and that kind of thing. I'm going to read the other question as well. It was very similar. And then we're just going to go through a few of our ideas of how parents can maybe alleviate a little bit of the conflict or help kids learn how to process their conflict. So this was the other question. My biggest parenting struggle at the moment is sibling rivalry, bickering, one-upping, putting down, etc. I've read books, consulted experts, given the team and her family name talk, etc., but nothing seems to work. It may be compounded by the fact that I have twins, aged 9, but I talk to my mom friends with different age siblings and it seems pervasive. Curious to know if you have any words of wisdom from your own experience or your fellow experts. So again, my first thought with this, Mom, is wow. I mean, both of these people, even to be taking the time to ask this question and do all this research, they're already doing a really good job of trying to sort this stuff out and just be aware of it, which is more than a lot of parents even have the bandwidth to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things I suggested to both of these parents was a book that I read years and years ago called Siblings Without Rivalry. And it's by the same authors of How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, right? Adele Faber and somebody Miklish. I'll put a link in the show notes. But I hadn't read it in so long since my own kids were little. So I found this really cool kind of quick reference guide. And I had sent it to both of these parents in my email response to them. And so it has some really good points. And I'll put a link to this also in the show notes. But it was put together by like the Montessori Notebook. That's the website. But some really good kind of a summary of the book, Siblings Without Rivalry. But Sarah and I both have experience with this, both in our own lives with our siblings and with our own kids. So why don't we start? I think it'd be interesting for our listeners to hear about our own experiences with our siblings and kind of how they've evolved to this point, as much as we can share. So do you want to start and then I'll share my experience?
Well, sure. So I am a middle child. I have an older sister who's 2 years older and a brother who is 3 years younger. I was raised in a really awesome, loving family. I was raised in the mountains much of my life and sometimes at the beach. We had lots of outdoor time. We had family dinners like My husband looks at my family and says it was about as awesome as it could be. And I feel that way about my family. However, as kids growing up, my sister and brother and I were constantly arguing. Constantly. We couldn't get along for more than a day. I remember my mom's frustration and throwing her hands up in the air. What am I going to do with you all? And she really equipped us to be kind and thoughtful and express our feelings. We even once had a teacher call from school because we were arguing so much there. What was the problem? So as we grew and finally got into our own planets, as I call it, one went off to college, one had different interests in high school, another one struck out on his way. As adults, we really grew to like each other a lot. We always loved each other, but now we really like each other. We appreciate the differences between us. We lean on each other. We make lots of family decisions together. But for us, we were in our 20s before we saw all that happening. I will say that all the groundwork, especially my mom laid, but my dad too, wasn't wasted though, because we still draw on how to use words of affirmation and how to be thoughtful in gift giving and how to consider someone else's opinion. All those things still play in. We just didn't seem to be able to pull it off as kids.
But I'm guessing you were all doing it with your friends more. Probably, like the things you were learning.
I think so. And I think that's a really good hope or sign of promise for families whose kids might not get along and there's a lot of bickering in the home, is to take a moment and see outside the home, did they have good friends? Mm-hmm. And if they do have that capacity, then you're going to be okay. If they struggle with getting along outside the home too, well, then let's work really intentionally on some friendship skills. But sometimes we just bring home the pressure and bring home the crankiness and we spill it on those who are closest to us. And so sometimes kids bring home their arguments just for their parents and their own, siblings.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So true. So my experience, I was the younger sister. There were just two of us. We're 3 years apart. And it's funny because my recollection of looking back, we had some, like in the early years, I remember I always wanted to, we had our own rooms, but I always wanted to go into her room and stay in the other twin bed in her room and stuff. This was when I was really little. But I remember several years where I was such a bratty little sister. Like really, honestly, I was just kind of the, bugging her about like, when she was going through adolescence, I remember just being obnoxious.
Oh, dear.
I remember trying to like spy on her and her friends and listen in on their conversations. And mostly I wanted her to play with me. And I was kind of wanting, why doesn't she want to play? I remember an experience, I was probably 8 or 9 and she was, 12 or 10 or 12 or something. And she was just more into like, her hair looking nice and whatever. And we were somewhere vacationing. And I'm like, come on, let's play in the pool, and she didn't want to. She wanted to be in the sun. And so for us, I think a lot of it was the age difference, which when you're like 10 and 13, this age difference is huge,
Right.
Or when you're 6 and 9 or whatever, it's like we had just completely different interests in what we wanted to play and do a lot of the time. So part of it was that. Also, we just have different interests and different personalities. And so I didn't appreciate her differences when I was little. So for us, it was similar to you and your siblings. We didn't have actually like later on, there was a time I remember the first year feeling like closer to her. I was a freshman in high school and she was a senior and she drove me to school to and from. And she started being more like a mentor and advising me because she was very kind to me and trying to help me she was trying to help me like with fashion and some of the areas that weren't my strengths because she had more strengths in those areas. And so I remember that was kind of the start of kind of our relationship. But then she went away to college and, we had a lot of years where, like you said, kind of going on our own planets. I was at different school than she was, and then she was out of school and I was still in college. And really it was when we started having kids. And this was in our, late 20s, early 30s. and we ended up living in the same community. And then it was really fun then to have, our kids similar ages and really brought us back together. And now I would say in the last, 5 years, we've grown even closer, just like you are doing, just navigating a lot of decisions that come with, our parents getting older and just sort of managing we're managing, we have teenagers still, we have our parents getting older, we're kind of in our 50s going through some things. And boy, I call my big sister now all the time for advice. And so, but I would not say anyone would have said we were not the kind of siblings when we were kids that were close or got along. We bickered and we were in the backseat of the car. I remember my parents having to yell at us all the time. Do I have to pull over? Because you're, and I was like, she's gone over my line.
Oh, me too.
Do you remember the line?
Oh my goodness, the line down the middle of, yes, I remember it.
Yeah. So I think that it can give, hopefully our stories, and I bet if parents think of their own stories, some of them can be hopeful. Whereas when you look back, there were times when you really didn't get along with a sibling that now you get along with better. I do think there are also cases, though, realistically, where siblings just are either so different or your sibling has some kind of maybe a mental health issue or something that really does make them very difficult to have any relationship with. And that's something that is just life, right? I guess.
Right. That is a hard loss.
Yes.
And it is a struggle then to know that I'm not going to get to have that kind of relationship with that person. Hopefully there is another person in their life that can be that brother or sister or cousin of choice and can meet that need well.
Yeah. And that's kind of in families in general. If you're not getting, whether it's your parents or your siblings, if you don't get the positive relationship you need to find it elsewhere. And that's why people, if you can find a family somewhere else, if you don't have one of your own.
Right.
So let's just talk about now, let's think about as parents ourselves and working with our own kids, some of the strategies that we've learned or, kind of through the school of hard knocks, our own experience or whatever, what has been helpful in just dealing with that rivalry or whatever you want to call it, sibling differences and bickering that, I don't know about you, but I think it happens in just about every family.
Nearly does, I bet. Well, I think the first thing that I would mention is, as parents, we can be really intentional about honoring the differences and the uniqueness of every child. We've all either heard it in our own family or on a television show. Why can't you be like your brother? I remember was promising myself I would never, ever, ever say that. And I hope I haven't, although I might have thought it. But, as parents to say, wow, I love this about you. You're so gifted at this. You bring this awesome, wonderful thing to our family. Oh, and I'm crazy for you and what you bring to our family. And as parents, really honoring those differences. Sometimes that's hard when a child may have a very different temperament than we do, and it takes a little while to grow to understand their interests or how they're wired.
Right.
But as parents, if we are modeling that we love you uniquely and we love you differently, at least then hopefully that will help kids not vie for their parents' attention or to feel the competition or comparison. They might feel it personally, but we as parents, be nice if we don't put fuel on that fire.
Right. In the Siblings Without Rivalry, one of the things that they talk about is that children don't need to be treated equally, but they need to be treated uniquely. And what I always think about, there are families, I know you know these families too, when a family has a child that has some type of disability or something that just requires, a lot more of just like whether it's medical visits or therapies or, whatever it might be, whether it's a, diabetes or a, Down syndrome, or there's just these things that in a family, sometimes there's a child who needs more attention, time, certain things from parents. And in those kind of situations, I think the siblings actually learn a lot from that. Like they can still feel loved and they can get what they need from their parents, but they recognize that their sibling needs something in an area that they don't. And I think it's more visible in that kind of situation than in a family where maybe nobody has any visible things. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because everybody is different. And I love the whole concept of love languages, where different people really are shown love and receive love in different ways. You might have a child who it's just quality time with you. and they just want to sit on the couch and read, or lots of time with you, or they want a half an hour of tucking in. And another one just really needs those words of affirmation. And to me, part of it is not trying to run around as a parent thinking all the time, have I done the exact same thing for this kid that I did for that kid? But instead, seeing each kid uniquely and thinking about how can I best parent this child? What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And it's a beautiful bit of wisdom to parent uniquely, not just equally, or what we might consider fair, that same number of minutes with each child. Kids get to the age where they can also tell you. I remember speaking to my middle child who loves being on stage and is gifted in drama and theater. We had been attending his older brother's lacrosse games, like so many of them. And a play came up that my middle son was in, and I said to him, because of the lacrosse commitments and because of my work commitments, I can't be at the theater helping with some of the parents so much. What would be a meaningful way that I could support you in the play? And we talked about it, and I said, I'd really like to volunteer to sew costumes. Would that be meaningful to you? Would that feel like, would you understand how excited I am that you're in this play? And it was really sweet. He thought it was really cool that I would sew costumes. And so, I did that for 4 years, actually 6 years. And it was a total blast. Even pulled my sister in to help with costumes sometimes. But he was able to communicate to me that would be meaningful. And he saw that as meaningful. If he had said, no, Mom, that doesn't count to me, then I actually would have come up with a different way to demonstrate support. So when our kids can articulate it, let's ask, because it might surprise us what it means to them, for us to support them.
And that's a really good example too, because when you think about it, our kids do different things and have different interests. And some of the interests are really easy to be like a parent supporter, like sports. Sports are something where it's like, okay, your kid's good at a sport or on a team or whatever, and it's so easy to just go to the events and cheer them on and be there. But then if you have another child who maybe doesn't do sports but has some other interests, I think that's such a great idea. It's like asking them, hey, what can I do? I love your interest in art. Do you want to go do this art weekend retreat together? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just thinking out of the box, but just if you could think about ways to uniquely help that one child or support them. And I think sometimes we have to look more at our children who are differently wired, not as mainstreamish. I feel like kids who are sort of those, do all the things that everyone recognizes everywhere and are really easy to just be like the normal parent to, it's a little more simple with them. And so I feel like this unique, addressing each child uniquely is really important and to make them feel they're loved and they're special to you, even if they don't do the same things as somebody else.
Absolutely. And even if it doesn't show up to others. I know a mom who has a young one who loves cooking. And so she has taken her to see several of the cooking shows that you can find on television. And to this child, these are superstars. And then they went ahead and the mom and the daughter made their own cookbook. And they baked and they cooked and they took photos, and she made a photo book out of it. And nobody knows, nobody saw it. It's just for the family. And what a way to honor that gift for that one child who does compare herself to her older sister too often.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was thinking about one of my favorite posts. I don't know that people have necessarily read it, but it's about gifts. And I really like experiential gifts. And I remember one year I was really trying to be intentional with trying to find experiential gifts for each of my kids. And one of my kids was really getting into photography. And I found this whole day Saturday photography workshop in our hometown. And I signed us both up to go do it. And it was just one of those things that's super memorable to me to have spent that day together doing that workshop, and so simple and fun. And so, yes, I love that if we spent a little more time thinking about each of our kids, asking them, if they're old enough, those questions like, what would be fun to do with me? I really want to support you or whatever. Love that. And then I think that takes away a bit of that feeling that a child might be having, especially in those times when you're feeling insecure or not confident in yourself. And kids compare themselves to others, even when parents aren't saying anything. So, wow, we can really help them build them up by showing them that we're excited about what they're interested in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And sometimes we get caught up in having our kids come to like what we're interested in. And actually, we're the adults. We got to flip that and say, no, I will learn what they're interested in. I might even learn that video game that I'm super lame at and not interested in, but just, to spend a little time entering his world and understanding what makes him tick around this. And then together we can find non-screen activities that tickle that same funny bone,
Yes. So that's one of the things that's addressed in the Siblings Without Rivalry is just that concept of not running around like a crazy person, trying to spend exactly the same amount of time and spending the exact same amount of money and doing the exact same things with every child, because that's not going to serve anybody well. And for one thing, no one will ever feel like it's equal anyway. So don't even try. So the way they word it is, instead of giving equal time, give time according to need. So whatever each child needs. And then let's just talk about, I think both of these parents asked, so I want to make sure we address this. And then we're going to do a whole follow-up episode on just conflict resolution in general with kids, because it's such an important topic and one that we work with kids a lot on at camp. But let's talk about when our kids fight, siblings bickering, fighting, and some different strategies that have worked for us and that we would hopefully could be helpful to other parents. And let's start with just sort of that normal bickering kind of stuff. What do you suggest? What is your practice that you've done with your kids?
Well, I love when there's enough space that everybody can have a little bit of their own space. We often, if you've done a long car trip or you've been cooped up together in one hotel room or we've been, in each other's space so much, sometimes just being unusually outdoors, to breathe and to center yourself, whatever words kids might want to use. Space is a really good thing. Time to just quiet one's own heart. We have to teach kids to do that. They don't know how to do it automatically, but making sure that in the hectic pace of life, they have some personal downtime and personal space. I think that's really healthy. When we ask kids to behave oh so well all the time within the rigor of a crazy schedule, they simply can't do it. Adults can't do it.
No.
So a pace and a space that is healthy is a great thing. I think also examining what kind of schedule our kids are in. Are they exhausted? Have they eaten? Have they had enough sleep? It's hard to behave well when I'm hungry. So wow, that argument right after school every day. I started taking snacks in the car when I picked the boys up. And the first thing they did was eat. And we actually decreased the squabbles, those little just naggy squabbles, by a good 50% just to get their blood sugar up. So those are some little things for the little squabbles. You had also mentioned one of your strategies. Sometimes just letting it go.
Oh, yeah. I think in general, I just think that, bickering is, unfortunately, between people who spend a lot of time together, can just be sometimes part of the deal. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had some bickering episodes with my spouse. I've had some bickering episodes. Occasionally. And so I think that for our kids, for them to recognize that, obviously you don't want that to be the daily, all the time thing, but I think to normalize it a little bit is important. So I think if we freak out and over respond to our kids bickering with one another, I think it just brings too much attention to it and too much power to it. So I tended to, I have quite a few kids, and, over the years, there's been, I can't even count all the different various random things, usually about some really dumb things about who's sitting in which seat and whose book somebody's is, whatever, toys, things like that. And in general, I chose to just stay calm and either just sort of ignore it, or if they came to me, I would just say to them with confidence, I have confidence that you guys can work this out. Just keeping myself out of it, because I just felt like in most cases it just nobody was harming each other. Bickering over a toy or which TV show you're going to watch or something like that is not harming anybody. And so I'd rather have them work on their skills of figuring this out. And I often would just, give, I would say, well, I'm happy to come in and just turn it off, or you guys can figure out what you're going to do.
Either or. There's your choice.
Yeah, I could do things. Sometimes I would do that where, if you'd like me to just turn off the TV, if you can't decide, or maybe you guys can work out something. And that, that seemed to be helpful.
Enough that they knew we better make a decision here or we're going to lose out. Yeah, that's great.
And I don't know, this is another thing that might be controversial, but so my girls didn't have any physical altercations. I don't know if this is typical, but my girls didn't physically fight. They would have like arguments or bickering kind of thing. My boys sometimes wanted to like wrestle and stuff, and not when they were like angry at each other, but oftentimes after wrestling, they would get angry because somebody would get hurt.
Yes.
But because in their case, their physical strength was somewhat equal, I allowed them to do that. So we had like a mat. So I don't know if this would be a popular thing, but I honestly, like, even with like, I think boys oftentimes like to do physical things. And I think it's actually like, I'm okay with if there's not a huge differential in their strength, even like boxing gloves and stuff. I know this is going to probably not be popular. We have one of those things in our garage, a punching bag.
Oh, yeah.
A punching bag.
Fabulous.
And gloves. And so I think even on some level, sometimes, especially with boys, they feel like that is helpful. So again, I know some people are just completely anti anything like that, but I just know that boys with their siblings, it's kind of a safe place to do that kind of stuff. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Is that bad?
I think, all of us are going to have those really heated moments and a lot of pent up energy, and having appropriate and safe ways to get it out, I think is great. Whether I think a punching bag's great. I'd rather they punching bag
than each other.
Yes. I think there's absolutely a place for that. Mm-hmm. I think that's great. Or, go for a run, go for a bike ride.
Yes.
Blow some steam off, go down to the school, hop in the pool, get some steam off. I think releasing that in a really physical way is great. Mm-hmm. And when it can be directed, again, in a safe space.
Yes.
And not at each other, not strangling each other, not hitting each other. I think that's really, really healthy. And I think I know a lot of adults who need to go for a run after that really hard conversation with someone at work, or it's not a bad thing.
So it goes back to that thing of just figuring out, helping our kids learn these coping mechanisms, and so I think a lot of times boys, like the wrestling, like sometimes they want to wrestle, like it's like a physical activity. It's kind of like going for a run.
Yeah.
So not done in anger, but done in like a way of like, let's, get sweaty kind of for a minute or whatever. I don't know. That was something that I think.
It's playful. It's kind of like when puppies, you watch puppies play or fight. Yeah. It's hard to tell between the two, but they're mostly just having fun.
Right.
And certainly our boys wrestled, and Steve dove in and wrestled, and my daughter would jump in and join the fray. And so there's a lot of fun that comes from that, but it's not directed with anger.
And it almost always ends, though, with a problem. Because
someone cries at the end.
Yeah, somebody always cries at the end. We just have to know that if you allow that, somebody's going to get a knee in the wrong place, and then it ends in crying, and then it's over. But any case, so this is where it talks about handling fighting, normal bickering, kind of just, I think, stay calm about it, ignore it as much as possible, or provide people more space / coping mechanisms. And I was thinking when, like, especially with the age differential, like the 13 to 8-year-old age differential, that's one where I'm going to say a 13-year-old needs some private space. And so there needs to be, if she has her own room, I think that as a parent, one way to give her that space she needs from like this younger sibling is to say, in the house, there's certain times or there's certain things like this is her space and you need to knock or ask to go in there, or, whatever. Just give her that ability to have her own space and know that you respect that.
Oh, I agree.
I think that's really important. That kind of goes along your space thing. And when there's such an age differential there, you're always asking them. I feel like I was always asking my older kids to, set the example and be the good big brother, big sister, all that stuff. And so, you want that older sibling so much to be this great example and all this stuff, but you also need to allow them the break.
Absolutely.
From like who I was. Like I was the buggy little sister. I was, my sister, I could see, and she was so gracious about it, and she doesn't remember it like I do, but I remember like a lot of things of just, and I think it came from, I want to play. What are you guys doing? Ooh, I'm really interested. You're teenagers. What do teenagers talk about? It came from a place, but I think just someone needed to just say, you know what, Audrey, you go do your thing or whatever. Mm-hmm. Give Leslie her space.
That's wise. I think that's wise.
So I think it's okay not to be insisting that they're always together. And also the whole thing about like play nice together. Well, if they're not, give them some space. Don't try to force people to be together who just are not compatible at the moment or at the age.
Right. And we can't demand closeness and we can't demand they are best friends, but we can require respect.
Yes.
And that was always, and they didn't have to agree. They didn't have to, want to spend all Saturday together, but they did have to treat each other with respect. And that's when we would step in with a consequence if they weren't respectful to each other. And that means respecting each other's belongings, respecting each other's confidences, respecting each other's reputation at school, not spreading rumors, not saying mean things. Just, we can expect respect, even if as parents we can't demand them being best buddy pals.
Or to even like each other in the moment.
They don't even always have to like each other.
No. And I mean, even though that's what we want, I think looking at the longer term thing, that if we keep them from doing things that really truly harm each other, which is when the low blows. I can't remember which book of Brene Brown's. She writes about how, siblings know each other so well that they know those ways that they can really hurt each other.
Absolutely.
And that's what we need to make sure in our homes, that we don't allow, like you were saying, like rumors, saying things at school about private matters happening with a person at home.
Right. Sharing that photo that would be embarrassing. That's where that respect piece comes in. And that really ties into, I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast, but intentionally teaching empathy to our kids. How do you think your sibling felt when you shared that? Or did that, or said that? So often we're quick to say, stop doing that, but we don't take that next step to say, we got to talk about empathy. What did it feel like? How would you feel? Do you want to be the cause of that feeling? We can start teaching empathy to little tiny kids.
Absolutely.
Even through storybooks and through our own experiences. And sometimes a sibling, I've seen it happen. A sibling will want to behave or react in a way, but they will catch themselves. If they know, wow, I don't want to be the big brother who caused that, or the big sister who made that happen. And that's a really long-term journey. But the more we teach empathy, the better I think we are at catching ourselves before we misstep, both with siblings and with friends outside the family.
And then I think further on, we've all done that in some way. We've made those mistakes where we've really hurt our sibling. And so then it's also teaching how you repair and apologize when you've said something that's really a low blow, or, that's part of this too. And this is part of the beauty and the difficult part of family. It's where we practice all parts of relationship, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think our kids need to understand, they need to see us doing that too. When we have sibling conflicts as adults, they need to see how we work it out, because it's a lifetime relationship. And I always think about how for my kids, once I'm gone and my husband's gone, each other are going to be the people who've known each other the longest. And if there's anything I wish for my kids, is that when I'm gone, they're still going to be calling each other and, relying on each other. Isn't that just what we all kind of want at the end?
Absolutely. And that they would all somehow walk each other home at the end of the day.
Yes. Okay, well, we have so much more to talk about. We're going to do a part 2 on our siblings without rivalry, or whatever we want to call it. We'll have to think of our own name because the book's already called that. Although we could specialize in that book and all the things. Okay, thanks, Sara, for being on again. And I hope we answered the start of those questions. But next we'll be talking about, in our next episode, about just in general conflict resolution and teaching our kids the skills they need to resolve conflicts better.
I look forward to that. Great.
Thank you so much for joining Sara and me for this episode of the podcast. I'm excited to be adding to my website the new option for you to send in recorded questions that I can play on future podcast episodes. Or feel free to send me an email at audrey@sunshine-parenting.com with your parenting questions. I would love to research and send you resources and perhaps have a whole podcast episode dedicated to your question. In preparing for this episode, I got out my well-worn yellowed copy of Adele Faber and Elaine Maslish's book, Siblings Without Rivalry: How to Help Your Children Live Together So You Can Live Too. I've had the book since the 1990s. In the introduction, or in chapter 1, they say, as they're reflecting on adult children. As I half listen from the next room, I am surprised at how relaxed I am. I realize how little emotional investment I have in the moment-by-moment temperature of their relationship. I know that the differences in interest and temperament that kept them from being close in childhood are still there. But I also know that over the years, I had helped them build the bridges to span the separate islands of their identities. If they ever need to reach out, they have many ways of getting there.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.